It's a great pleasure to be here today. I will try and discuss some of the context and what is happening with the cocoa processing industry with you. So what are we looking at? The journey into the world of cocoa processing. So first let me see that I can use this one. So this arrow, yes, takes us forward. Now, I also have the value chain. However, I do promise you, or forgive me please, I do not have any formulas whatsoever. So already to set your expectations. So I'll take the value chain because that is indeed important. That is where we as processors actually are inserted. So we are influenced by what happens in that value chain. We look at the structural and at the cyclical dimension of it. And then I will identify 3 things that I think are important for processors to succeed and how that will shape, I think, the industry going forward. So if that's okay, and try to do that in 20 minutes. So this is how I like to represent the value chain of cocoa and chocolate. It is 4 steps. So as you all know, the value chain is something, it's a beautiful concept. It's with us now for over 30 years, and it was introduced by Michael Porter in the 80s. It basically looks at all the steps and economic activities that are necessary to take cocoa from a cocoa produced to a consumer product. You will see that every step of this activity actually has specific value addition, and Michele before me tried to put a value to that. But one of the more important aspects of it, I think, is that for every step you require specific know-how and specific expertise without which you are going to fail and not be able to be successful in completing that step. And the more steps you try to take over in that supply chain, the more difficult it will become to combine all the different skills that are there. That is what I refer to here with capability flow. Well, there's obviously then also a geographic scope to a value chain, and that of cocoa is particularly fascinating and global in all of its dimensions. But the one really that I want to discuss with you today is the aspect of governance, which is a very beautifully sounding word, but really refers to the interaction and the interplay between all the actors in that value chain. How do we interact with one another? What are the variables? And how do, in fact, we move forward in that development of the value chain. So having said this, so there's different things going on at the moment in that value chain. Some are structural dynamics and some are cyclical dynamics. The structural ones have to do with the long-term evolution in each of those 4 buckets. Right? Cocoa processing is only one of the 4 buckets, and it responds to what happens in the others. The cyclical dynamics are really to do with the business cycle, with the evolution and the sort of, the evolve cyclically, and there's a repetition over a number of years. So we really have to separate here. Moving quickly then, I will look at what's going on in a structural sense in the 2 buckets that are sort of before and after the cocoa processing. The first one is what's happening on the side of the structural supply. A lot of the speakers before me have very eloquently, highlighted different aspects of what's going on. Very simply, really, from a cocoa processor standpoint, one first dynamic that we need to look at is the cocoa price. Over the last 4 years, or 3 years in fact, that are listed in this chart, cocoa prices have in fact almost doubled. And over that same time frame, the structure of the cocoa selling in the world has actually gone down to 2 sellers that sell 70% of the world crop, being the Ivorian Conseil de Café Cacao and the Ghanaian Cocoa Board. The other factor is that obviously this has led to, there's an improvement, right, from the side of the price that farmers can access over this period of time. This is an index chart from 2001 to 2014, so you can see the improvement there. One of the more, obviously, whenever you make an index chart, it depends a little bit which is your first year that you choose as a base, how much the individual countries will move. But one of the interesting elements is to see how actually Indonesia has failed to keep up with the rest of the countries. And part of that is the introduction of a differential export duty on the cocoa beans. Now, and that takes us, though, to the real problem here, which is, despite the fact that prices have almost doubled, despite the fact there has been an improvement, actually the world crops are sort of stable at that 4 million tons that we are achieving today. Now, this is now for 4 years, and we can say that there is an improvement in cocoa coming from Africa, an improvement in cocoa coming from South America. But the fact is that we've got, issues with the crop that comes from Asia, which is under very, very serious threat. We have had difficult situations with Ghana now in this past year. So we are not really making the step that would be required at this stage. Issue is an issue of productivity. I will not go into that direction because there has been already plenty covered on this topic. And I would like to take you then to what we see as a dynamic that is affecting us from the side of the demand. From the side of the demand, I think we all, as consumers in our own households, we realize that one of the #1 impacts that has taken place in the landscape of retail today has been the growth and emergence of private label and hard discounters. If you look at Europe, this is data Euromonitor. This is the value of private label in chocolate confectionery across Western Europe. It has grown in the last 10 years from 10 to 11%. In volume, it means it represents today 20% or more of the volume of chocolate in Europe. Private label. Now let's look at hard discounters, which is a different concept. Hard discounters, this is data from Germany by Nielsen, and it shows that 60% of chocolate in Germany, which is the largest European market, 60% of chocolate is sold at hard discounters. And most people here who live in the UK, which is the second market that hard discounters have put into their radars, right? That is the UK. The second largest chocolate market in Europe, which is still 30% smaller than Germany, but still the second largest. And then that takes us to the third chart I wanted to share here, which is how much chocolate is actually sold on promotion. In Europe, 1/3 of chocolate, well this graphic is actually for Germany, but it is applicable to other countries as well. A large majority of the chocolate is generally on promotion, 1/3 on a constant basis. Actually, it has increased recently. And what does it mean? It really shows that retailers use chocolate as an exciting product to attract traffic to their shops, to make sure that there is that element of excitement. But it also shows you one thing, remember this, and remember this. Chocolate is not a luxury product. It is an everyday treat for adults and children. Maybe there are, the finer flavor and the bits that are growing and that extra element to it, but the vast majority is a mass consumer good. And as a mass consumer good, it really must keep up with the expectations that consumers have on price. And in fact, I got the team here to look at a statistic for me. It's chocolate confectionery inflation, for example, in Germany, over the last 15 years, has been half the growth rate of the general inflation in the country. So that really tells you the pressure that is on at the other side of the scale that we're in. Now, enough about that. So we've talked about the structural dynamics, which is on the one side, the struggle that we have to guarantee a sustainable supply for everybody, the farmers, but also the ones that consume chocolate, that need to have an affordable product. Now I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on the cyclical aspect of the dynamics, which is really the business cycle, something that all of us in this room have to deal with on a daily basis, I would say. And one of the most cyclical variables that we experience also in our industry is investment. When demand is there, when margins are attractive, investments pour in, and then that same cycle of investment sort of looks at having margins again coming into normal or under pressure. Now, over the last 4 years, we have had actually a very, very significant wave of investments. Most investments have taken place in Africa and Asia. In fact, I've listed here just a few ones taking place in Indonesia, in Ivory Coast, and in Nigeria, adding up to 400,000 tons of bean equivalent capacity. Now, unfortunately, over those 4 years, demand has only grown by 100,000 in our estimate. So now obviously you build capacity for the future, you build capacity to cater for growing consumer demands and middle classes and emerging markets, and we all know that. But the fact is that we have had a couple of circumstances that have hindered that. On the one hand, high prices have certainly played a role, and a difficult general macroeconomic environment is now playing more and more in the mind of consumers in those countries. So in our estimate, we are looking basically at, you will need an increase of demand of about 10% from where we are today to actually absorb this extra capacity. And depending on the scenarios that one makes on the consumption, it'll take quite a few years, I would say, before we are actually there. Now, this is just to give you a picture of the world grind and where it happens in the world. The graphic, the bar chart, essentially highlights over the last 10 years the growth of capacity that has been taking place in Asia and Africa has gone basically from 30 to 40%. But also it highlights the fact that investments in capacity take place where economically it makes sense, and the running of capacity wherever it is located, it also responds to economic sense. One could go now into the direction of saying, there are many countries in which there is very, very large amount of capacity which in the end doesn't get utilized. But I would like to leave you more with, sort of bullet points of what are the considerations. Accessibility of quality beans has to be the number one. It is not exclusive of origin countries, but it is a very, very high need for every type of location. Level of processing costs, which has to do with energy, but also with many other variables that regard your logistics, basically. Infrastructure and ability to economically and timely evacuate products from certain locations and bring them to the customers where they need it. This is typically a very large problem in some of the origins, for example. Access to customers I've already mentioned, and last but not least, government support and indeed an eye towards the economics of the industry. As I said, investments are made, but investments also need to run in a commercially viable way. As an example, and maybe an interesting reflection, is to say that, in fact, if you look at where capacity is located in the world, is also a parameter for determining the flows of the beans. And today we all have present in our eyes the example of Asia and Indonesia, where a lot of capacity has been installed, and yet by the combination of growing capacity and declining crop, now that region has become a net importer of beans. This has an important impact in the economics of processors, especially when a large part of the products that get produced there needs to be exported outside of Asia. So then, so the industry margin, right, one of the parameters that we have worked around in a few of the other presentations. We've got structural margin pressures that I've described. We've got cyclical margin situations that I've described. And this is the situation of the industry margin, represented in here as the combined ratio, reaching a multi-year low now in these months as we speak. This is something that currently weighs in the industry. It needs to be taken into account, and this begs us to really look at those structural factors, and we'll come back to that in a minute. However, is it all doom and gloom, just to lift you up? How can we thrive, and how can we move on in this environment? And I think that there are three pillars that we must recognize. The first pillar must be the quality. We want to be able to produce consistently top quality products that justify the need of customers for unique products. There is a demand for that, there is a need in the market for that, and how do we do it? Through the ability to select, access, and blend top quality beans but also through the know-how and the expertise and the experience of the men and women that are in the industry and that allow that. Let's not forget, cocoa is a product of nature, has got so much variability, and in fact, the ability to process it adds as much value as the ability of having a prime raw material. The second element, which is very important for processors, is efficiency. And I want to refer here especially to the point of supply chain efficiency. When we look at how the cocoa world is today and where the supply is concentrated and where the demand is, we need to consider the importance of connecting to the local supply and demand dynamics and yet have the ability to smooth out any hiccups that happen. Our customers want to have continuity. They want to know that when they call a processor, he will be there, pick up the phone and provide. And last but not least is ability around risk management. That means that we need to be able to protect and facilitate business. And that is what risk management is for. If we're not able to anticipate that, all the other things that happen on the quality and on the efficiency will be burned. So, and now I want to sort of try and lead to a final thought. I promise I will not take any more of your time. But if we think back of what we said in the first slide about the governance in the industry, the governance is how we interact with one another, how the processing step interacts with the one before and the one after. These are the three parameters that affect our interactions. These are the three levels of our interaction. And as the whole industry dynamic is affected by these trends that move it and shift it, and it's like, you know, earthquakes going back and forth, the level at which we want to allocate risk and allocate costs in the different steps of the value chain on this level is what the industry has to deal with. That is what is a key challenge for us. So what we've done today, we've looked at in this small presentation what are the structural dynamics in the industry, how those dynamics affect the risk management, and ultimately how the various players in the value chain optimize their operations and try to move risk and cost factors from one bucket to the next. And the ability to deal with that effectively and in an adequate risk reward is what is going to determine, in fact, the dynamics of our industry in cocoa processing. Thank you.